welcome to our first webinar. I'm very excited to be the first one at MAC to do this. And so let me tell you a little bit about MAC, and then we'll get right into the presentation. So as you know, a lot of you know, I recognize a lot of names on the list. We're a nonprofit organization founded by Hubie Jones 46 years ago. And ever since then, we've been working to help kids get services through their IEPs, through school, and in a lot of other ways. And if you want to find out more information about MAC, you can go to our website at massadvocates.org, and we'd have a lot of information there. And I don't know if I said this before, but I'm Joanne Pino, and I work here at MAC. I've been here for 16 years, and I'm going to be your presenter for tonight. And my coworker, Shalene Gupta, is also here, and she's helping us to make things run smoothly. So,
hello, everyone. Glad to be here tonight.
And she's the calming voice to my hyper voice. So, so as you know, this is a free webinar that's provided by MAC's Autism Center. You can learn more about the center on our website as well. In order for us to continue to advocate and to provide more presentations like this, we would like to let you know that we would greatly appreciate if you can support MAC, and if you would like to do so, that's another option that's on our website. It's
There's a donation button.
There you go. There's a donation button on there. Thank you. And you can hit that at any time when you're looking at our website to donate. So thank you anyway. So before we get started, I want to just do a few housekeeping announcements. So during this webinar, you can ask questions along the way. And we're going to, there's a control panel. Some of you are typing in there that, yes, you can hear me. So in that control panel, you can type your questions that you might have. And then in between each section of the presentation, we're going to stop for about 5 minutes and then answer the questions that are showing up on the list. And Shalene's going to be the one helping me to do that. So thank you so much. And then at the end of the webinar, there's going to be a survey that pops up on your screen, and we really appreciate it if you can fill that out. As you know, since we're a nonprofit organization, we have grantors and funders that give us money, so we have to report to them. And so this is one way for us to be able to do it through the answers to the questions that we'll be asking. And we appreciate your feedback on the presentation as well, especially since this is our first webinar. We really want to know how we can make it better and improve it. So the information that you give us is really very helpful. So I think that's everything I'm supposed to say at the beginning. So we're going to just get right into starting on the presentation. And again, if you have questions, type them up, and then when we, by section, I think if you didn't check, you might want to check your email, because there was a reminder sent to you about this webinar. And attached to that, there was a link to be able to get the handouts. So if you don't have them there, you could, try to find them there either now or afterwards. So you could have a split screen or something and see the handouts as well. And as I said, in between each of the sections, we'll stop for a few minutes and answer some questions. So that's how you can participate. So we're going to get started. So, again, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm happy to be here to talk about this exciting new law. One of the things that we know now is implementation has been a little bit slower than we would have anticipated, and not all the processes are in place. But we wanted to get the information out to the families and as fast as possible with information that's accurate, and we are updating this presentation as often as we can. One of the reasons that the turnout of this is so slow is that the new governor, when he was hired, he did put a freeze on all new regs until he got a lay of the land. So that's something that hopefully is going to start to be changing now. He also put a freeze on hiring, so some of the implementations of some of these did include hiring some folks, and all that was on hold for a while. So hopefully that's going to be changing, and things are going to start to get into place, although some of the agencies were doing this even though, not everything was exactly in place. They were doing the right thing and getting things started so that they could begin to help the students. So I'm going to switch slides here, sorry. Okay, So as you might know, in 2010, Governor Patrick established the Autism Commission. And the commission was asked to look into where there were gaps in services for folks with autism spectrum disorder from birth to adulthood. And then they were asked to make recommendations to close these gaps and remove whatever barriers were there for these families to be able to get services. And the report was released in 2013. So as you can see, there was 3 years that this group of folks worked really hard on this report to be able to get accurate information out to and then get services for these families. And some of the members, just so that you know, Amy Weinstock from Arica, Ann Gray, who was a parent of a child with autism. Barbara L'Italian at the time was a parent, but now she's a senator in the legislation. And members of different autism resource centers were all members of the commission. Also, Julia Landau from MAC and adult service organizations like DDS and DMH. So those are all different folks and agencies that were part of the commission. So I want to provide you with an overview of this landmark legislation, which was signed by the governor in 2014 at Fenway Park. And you would think that because he signed this legislation that everything would go into effect right away, but that's not the case. There is a 90-day wait for new legislation to be put into effect after it's signed by the governor. And then you have all the licensures and the regulations that need to be fixed and updated. So it always takes longer than you would anticipate for the bill to actually come into effect. So I want to talk about each of these areas, the components of the law, and I'm going to talk about some in more detail than others. And as you can see, there's a real lot of information here. So I'm going to try to make it easy as possible to share this information with you, but we'll see. So anyway, we are going to get going on all these different topics. So it's going to be a while. It takes a little bit of time to get through each of the sections. But we will stop for the questions along the way. So the commission, so first of all, we're going to talk about MassHealth and the MassHealth changes. And so the commission found that MassHealth members with autism were excluded from benefits from getting services through their insurance because they didn't have private insurance. So this was creating a two-tier system that would allow for those that had private insurance to be able to get these services, and then those that didn't have private insurance weren't able to get the services. So it was making it very difficult for these families. So the solution was to have MassHealth cover medically necessary treatments for children with autism who are under 21 years of age. And it would include applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, and augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC devices, including tablets. And we're going to talk about each of these in the next few slides. So MassHealth now covers medically necessary services for children 0 to 21 with autism. And so one of the things that folks were asking us is, how is this different from the Children's Autism Medicaid waiver? So some of the differences is that the waiver has limited amount of slots, so not every child would be able to be getting the services. And the waiver is only up to age 8, whereas, as it says in these slides, MassHealth will cover this until they're 21. And then with the waiver, there's only up to 3 years that they get these services. And then there's a step-down process. So again, this is from 0 to 21, whereas the waiver is only till 3 years old. And the waiver actually covers more than medically necessary. So they could cover for maybe an aide or a coach, whatever the youth might need, compared to this medically necessary things that the MassHealth would be covering. So I just wanted to make sure that I got everything here. One of the things that we've been hearing is MassHealth is saying that the youth, if they're 0 to 8 years old, that they can't have both, that they can't get the MassHealth coverage if they have the waiver. And that's something that MAC is checking into because we really don't feel that that's the case. Because, as I said, the waiver covers for more than medically necessary. So you could be getting something on the waiver that you wouldn't be getting covered under MassHealth. So I think that's something that we're going to be checking into, and we'll keep you posted on that information. So ABA coverage is for children under 21 diagnosed with autism through their managed care plans. So if they have MassHealth Standard, MassHealth Common Health, or Family Assistance, then this youth would be covered to be able to get ABA services through MassHealth. The coverage is also available for children with MassHealth as a secondary insurance. Okay. So for those that have MassHealth as a primary insurance, parents need to get evaluations from doctors or psychologists that say that they medically need ABA services. And then the family needs to contact an ABA provider. And once they get the provider will need to contact MassHealth to get prior authorization to be able to evaluate your child and then to be able to write up a treatment plan for these ABA services. So another thing that folks might be asking about, and so that you need to know, is that schools will now be able to use families' MassHealth to be able to cover for their ABA services that you're receiving through school. And this is not something new, as a lot of us know. It's not something new because schools have been able to do this for speech, language, OT for many, many years. But they do, as usual, need to get parents' permission to be able to bill MassHealth for these services. And one of the things that we learned, which I find very exciting, is that the only way that MassHealth is going to be covering the ABA services for the school personnel is if the ABA services are written into the grid on the IEP. So this is actually really a good advocacy tool to be able to get the services written into the IEP because, as we know, sometimes the schools aren't writing ABA services into the grid on the IEP. So now we're going to talk about if you have MassHealth as a secondary insurance. So if you have MassHealth and your primary as a secondary insurance and your primary insurance doesn't cover MassHealth, then you can now go through the MassHealth to be able to get ABA services. And so if you are using your MassHealth to be able to get full coverage because your insurance doesn't cover ABA services, then the ABA provider will need to be a MassHealth provider, okay? But if you're going to be using, if your private insurance does cover MassHealth, if your private insurance does cover ABA, then you will be able to use MassHealth as a copay, and they would also cover deductibles as well. And then the ABA provider in that case would not have to be a MassHealth provider. So I know it's confusing, but that's the story. And one other thing, too, is this is going to also retroactive until May 2015. So if some families have already begun to get services and they were paying for it themselves, then they can then do this retroactively and put it through to MassHealth if they had started to get the ABA services from May on. Again, I just want to make sure I've covered everything. Oh, yeah, one of the things that you have to make sure is that if you're going to be getting the MassHealth services, the ABA services for our students are going to be covered under the Massachusetts Behavioral Health Partnership, or MBHP. And this way, we have to make sure when you're enrolling your child or the child is being enrolled for MassHealth that you have to make sure that they're also enrolled under the Mass Behavioral Health Partnership, because other than that, they won't get the ABA coverage. Also, the MassHealth, the ABA provider would also have to be able to be authorized by MBHP, but we'll talk about that again in the next couple of slides. So this slide's talking about the steps for providers, and what happens is that the provider would have to apply to become a MassHealth approved provider. And as I said earlier, they would also need to be authorized by MBHP for cost sharing with MassHealth. So that's something that your provider needs to be aware of, or you can actually tell your provider about it if they might not know about that. But before providing any services, the ABA provider would have to do an evaluation, and they would have to be authorized under the Child's Managed Care Plan. And again, I already talked about the school being able to be reimbursed for that, which is really exciting, I think. Okay, so now we're going to say who can provide ABA's coverage. So now ABA has to be provided by a licensed applied behavioral analysis. And what happened was the law was changed. It was passed in the fall that now that ABA providers will have to have a license to be able to provide ABA in Massachusetts. So again, this is one of the things that has been delayed, but once they have to actually build the programs in order for somebody that right now is certified as an ABA provider, they will now have to get their license, take courses to get their license. So those courses have to be put into place. MassHealth is very aware of this issue, and they have agreed and will continue to cover a certified ABA person until these other procedures is in place, and then once the licenses are available, they will only then cover for licensed ABA folks. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of hard, but we can go back once we have the questions. If it did make sense, I can help answer any of them. So we've had some questions along the way, and things have changed as well, but one of the questions that we get quite often is once services are approved, how long do you have to be reauthorized? And so MassHealth is saying that treatments will have to be authorized probably every 6 months. But again, this is not something new. This is something that has happened for MassHealth for other services before, so it's not surprising. And then we have a lot of questions about the rates. Are they going to be competitive? And so, as you know, MassHealth does pay less than what most of the docs charge. So they're saying it's going to be competitive, but I'm sure it's still not going to be near what the docs charge anyway. But it's a complex process, and MassHealth does negotiate within each managed care plan what the rates will be set at. So if you have, I don't know, what are some of the different private insurances. If you have Harvard Medical, they would be reimbursed by MassHealth at a certain rate, where, what is another one, Tufts would be reimbursed at a different rate. So it just all depends on what insurance you have because it's negotiated with each of the plans. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the AAC part of the legislation, the augmentative and alternative communication. So what is AAC? So AAC is devices used by people who are nonverbal or who have limited speech that allows them to communicate. So there's all different types of options. There's low-tech options such as communication boards or PACS communication signs, and high-tech devices such as electronic, and now that includes tablets that would produce speech or written output. So one thing that's good about this is this part of the legislation is that, a lot of times legislation may ask, in this case, legislation was asking for services to be provided for kids with autism. But in this case, the legislation is actually broader because this is encompassing for children with all disabilities. And then actually once the regulations are final, this is going to be also covering for adults as well. So keep that in the back of your mind as we continue on with this. So before the law, MassHealth only covered dedicated devices such as like the Dynavox, but now they are opening it up to include iPads and laptops. And again, this is for student kids with all disabilities. So this is really exciting. It's a great new step for a lot, especially since, you know, the iPads is something that's so acceptable for so many children anyway. So if our kids with communication devices would have a device like this, it would encourage more friendships, which actually is a story that we heard from some parents before this. So what is the process for approval? So parents need to get an evaluation from a speech and language pathologist stating that it's medically necessary that they have a device and that they have a communication disorder. And then the speech and language pathologist would then recommend what type of device that they are going to should be using, and an approved provider would be then given to be able to get the tablet. So one of the things, too, that's included in this is email and texting. So the law is saying that communication does include the option for emailing and texting. So that will then still be able to be used with the iPad. So, and, you know, again, before this law, you know, speech and language pathologists weren't even allowed to look at an iPad or a laptop as an option for some of our kids, even though they knew up until that point that was probably something that would be beneficial for them. It didn't give them that option, but now that option is there. So, you know, where do you go to get a tablet? And I hate to say it, but you're not going to just be able to go to the Apple Store and be able to get a tablet. All durable medical equipment needs to be obtained from a MassHealth approved provider. And so that's where you need to go. And the speech and language pathologist, once they do the evaluation and write up the prescription and all that, they would give you the names of the providers, but I do have them here. I will try to pronounce them and give you the list of the names. But also, just to back up for a minute, this also includes software, cases, and repairs. So if you do have a child or a student that needs a device and the speech and language pathologist said that they can use an iPhone, then all the software should be included through MassHealth. Any cases that they need, because we know a lot of times our kids might need the strong, heavy-duty cases so that they don't break. And if it needs repairs, this would all be covered under MassHealth. So some of the providers that, from what I'm hearing or what we're hearing, is that right now there's 3 providers that you can go to get tablets, and they can configure the devices. And that's Words Plus, Prentke Romic Company, and Tobii ATI, which has merged with Dynavox. So those are the places that you can go to get the tablets, and they, like I said, configure it. But then to be able to get the accessories that would go with it that you might need, then you would have to go to these other places, which would be National Seating and Mobility, Hudson Mobility, and New Motion Mobility. So that's the only places that you can get the devices as far as we know right now. That's what we're hearing from MassHealth. So if that changes, hopefully we can let you know about that. Okay, so now we're going to actually take some questions from this. Shalene, are you going to read the questions? Is that okay? So Shalene's going to read the questions, and then I'm going to see if I can answer it.
All right, lots of great ones here for you, Joanne.
Oh, thank you.
First of all, will the school district assessing the student's Massachusetts health benefits limit the benefit the student to the student for services in the home and the community?
So that's a really good question, and I should have mentioned that. The answer to that is no. It shouldn't. It should be. It should not limit it at all. If the family is getting ABA services outside, and then the school asks if they can bill their MassHealth, then it is not supposed to affect at all any of the services that they're already getting. And if it does, that's something that Mac really wants to hear about. So let us know.
Next up, where can families find a list of ABA providers enrolled with MassHealth?
Okay, so that's another good question. There is a list that's on our website of ABA providers. It's also a list on the MassHealth website.
The question on the school. What is the process if the student is receiving the services of an ABA aide? Do they bill Massachusetts Health for the whole day? What if the aide is shared? There are clients who are concerned that they'll have their health care billed, but wonder if their child will actually receive the full services.
Yeah, actually, I don't know how they do that. Honestly, I really don't know how they do that because they've been doing this for years. I suppose it's easier. It depends. So they're going to have to do it by hour, I would think. So, for instance, in your IEP, I would assume that they're going to have to put, say, 5 hours of ABA. So then and that would be depending a week, a day, depending on what's written in your IEP, is how that they would be able to do it. Again, the way you know if you're going to be getting the services is you're going to have to make sure that it's written in the IEP, written in the grid page for, number one, it should be covered on MassHealth or through MassHealth, and that is how you keep track of what your child is getting through school. I hope that answered your question.
We're getting some comments, but it's hard to hear me reading the question, so please let me know if it's better now. And there was a clarification asked. So there's no cap on the hours paid by MassHealth for the services?
I don't know the answer to that. And if you can email me at if you know what my email is, well, it's on the website anyway. But I can try to answer that question or find the answer to that question. I'm thinking that there's probably so many hours that they're entitled to. But again, if they're getting it through school as well and school is charging it, it shouldn't interfere from what you're getting on the outside on your own personally. So you might get a cap, say, for instance, 5 hours a week. That's what you've been getting. But the school services shouldn't interfere with that amount.
So another question. Can a school refuse to write ABA services in the grid when a doctor has recommended it?
Yes. The simple answer is yes, they can. They can refuse to put it in the IEP. Some school districts do that. And that's where then the family would then, need to do some more negotiating, get more proof that that's what they need, maybe another opinion, depending on where it's coming from. But yes, it's been known to happen that schools can do that. And a lot of school districts don't put it in the grid. They might put it somewhere else in the IEP too. That's why having, saying that they're only going to cover it if it's written into the grid from MassHealth is a good advocacy tool for us meaning advocates and parents.
Another question here. If the provider is via a school district, do they also need to be authorized or become a MassHealth approved provider?
Can you read that again? I don't think I can see that far.
If the provider is via a school district, do they need to be authorized or become a MassHealth approved provider?
Yes, I believe that's the case, and I think schools already are because they've already been covered. So I believe schools are already approved providers.
And we have time for one last question. Somebody is asking, is the licensing process separate from the training and certification, which makes somebody a BCBA?
Well, yeah, so a lot of, right now, I have to think about this one. I don't want to give you misinformation, so this is something I really need to think about. So read it one more time for me.
Sorry, one second. Getting lots of great questions here. Losing track. All right. Is the licensing process separate from the training and certification, which makes someone a BCBA?
Well, so now it's going to be that anybody that was going to be able to provide ABA services and their BCBAs, they have to be licensed BCBAs. So I don't know if there's going to be any type of grandfathering process. That's something that I would have to check into for this. But they would have to get a new separate license to be able to provide services. But again, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have your child's aid providing ABA services for them, as long as they're being overseen by the licensed BCBA. So it's the person who's going to be in charge, overseeing, and maybe doing some one-on-one will have to be a licensed BCBA now instead of just a certified. So I don't know how much more they're going to be asking from them, but it will be a little bit different because it's a licensure process now instead.
And that's all the time we have for questions for this section, but if you've got anything burning, hang on to it. If we have and ask us again at the end, and if we have time, we'll get to it. If not, we'll provide you information with how to get a hold of us for further questions.
Okay. Thank you so much for helping me with the questions. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the second part of this presentation, and this is going to be about the creating of the ABLE account, which is the Achieving a Better Life Experience. So the Commission had found that, of course, and as we all have known this for a very long time, that there are added costs to living with a disability, and there's additional expenses and worries, and then there's also the risk of losing public benefits if you do save any money. So the solution was that the state should have ABLE accounts that would allow an individual to save money to pay for disability-related expenses. And so this is going to be a tax-free type of savings account, and it would protect the benefits for SSI type of benefits that this person is already getting, and it's owned by the person with the disability. So these ABLE accounts will be modeled after the college savings account, which a lot of us are aware of, and the college savings account are called a 529 account. And the ABLE account is going to be called a 529A account. And one of the things that we have found out with the regulations and things is that you cannot roll over a 529 account to a 529A account. And we really feel that this is a big problem, or I feel it's a big problem, because a lot of times that, you find out you're pregnant and everybody's so excited and the grandparents, start a 529 account for your child because, expecting everybody to go to college. And then sometimes later you don't find out until much later if your child has a disability. So I find that this is an issue, but it's something that would have to be looked into later. And again, it's something like when a law is passed, it's not everything, not all the issues are always thought of at first, so maybe this is something that can be looked into later and maybe changed. But one thing to remember, that with this ABLE account, that the youth is the owner of the account. And they are aware that sometimes our youth are not able to be able to sign and be the true owner of the account, and that they are aware that there might be some folks that have like a power of attorney or a guardian. So they are aware of this, and they are going to be addressing this once these regulations and things are being released. So the ABLE savings accounts are used to pay for our broad range of supports and services for individuals with disabilities, and these are called qualified disability expenses. And we have some examples of these on the next few pages. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things, this is going to be, these accounts are going to be administrated by the Massachusetts Education Finance Authority, or MEFA, the same people that are already doing the 529 accounts. So they've been there, they've done this, they get it. The thing that they might not get is the disability piece, but this is what who is going to be in charge of overseeing these accounts. So the law says a qualified disability expense is an expense made on behalf of the individual with the disability and can include, and this is the list of what it can include. And the funny thing is on our list, education is the first thing. So if they're saying you can't roll over the 529 to the 529A account because the 529 is supposed to be used for education, but education is one of the first things as an expense on here. So I think that's pretty interesting. And it does say that housing is something that is included as a qualified disability expense, and that is true to a certain degree. There's some limitations. And so, for instance, you cannot go and pay your rent with the 529A money, but you can use the money to, like, widen doorways or to build ramps onto the house. Another thing that's covered is transportation, and employment training and support is another piece that's covered. So there's this whole list. I'm not going to read every single thing of it here because you have it in front of you, or some of you do. Well, maybe I should read it. I don't know if you all do, but there's a whole list of things that are covered. And we don't know if this list is going to change at all once the final regs are passed, but that's something that we're waiting to hear about, because Massachusetts actually passed their law in August of 2014, and which was really good because the federal law wasn't passed until December 2014. So again, Massachusetts was leading the way, which is a good thing. But one of the things that we have to be sure is that the laws cannot be less than what are in federal regulations. So we have to kind of wait to see what the feds are doing. Our Massachusetts laws can be stronger than federal laws, but they can't be weaker. So we need to make sure that our regulations are in line with the federal regulations. And the federal regulations, it was just a hearing in October. It's November now, so it was in October. And we have to just see, if anything has to be changed, and then we'll have more information. We don't know if any of the disability expenses are going to be changed or anything like that, but hopefully. And maybe with the federal law, who knows, I doubt it, but maybe there would be a mechanism to do the 529 to the 529A rollovers, but right now there isn't. So just keep that in mind, because, this is just giving you another option to help save money for your child. So just keep that in mind. It's just another option. Oh, and then another thing, too, is that when the money is taken out of this account, it wouldn't be taxed. So that's another reason to have it as an account, but there are penalties put against this if it's used for non-qualifying expenses. So again, keep that in mind. So who's eligible for this? So individuals with disabilities who receive benefits under SSI or SSDI are eligible, or individuals that submit a disability certification, and that the disability was onset or occurred before they were 26 years of age. And again, this is something that opened up to folks with all disabilities. So this is another piece of the legislation that is opened up, that is not just for those with autism spectrum disorder. So eligibility for this will be determined every year, and the disability certification may be different by diagnosis. So that's something that we have to keep an eye on for this as well. So what we know now. So we know that the money that people can save in these type of accounts is that it can't exceed $100,000. If it does, then the SSI would be suspended, but we do know that Medicaid eligibility would continue. So the annual contribution, there's a limit of $14,000 per year. And in Massachusetts, the total limit for these this type of ABLE account is $375,000. But that doesn't change the fact that if it's over $100,000, that the SSI would be suspended. So keep that in mind. And there is a Medicaid payback provision in the ABLE account. And an eligible individual may only have one account. They can't have more than one. One thing that we've been told is that this account, if you have a child with a disability, and if you have two children with a disability, and God forbid one of the children passed away, this could be rolled over for another child with a disability. So there is the rollover option, but the payback option is also there as well. Just making sure I didn't miss anything here. And I don't know. Okay. So when is this going to be available? So the goal was that this would be available by 2016. And again, like I said, the Federal Able Act regulations have been proposed and that there was a hearing. So now we are just waiting to see. Massachusetts is checking to make sure that they're going to be in line with what those regulations are. And then the investment firms need to develop what they need to do, which I'm sure that's already in place because MIFA already had that option, because this money that in the savings account will be invested, so there'll be a lot of growth in it. So that's another reason why you really need to make sure that it doesn't exceed that limit of $100,000, because those penalties will come in. So again, you just really need to keep an eye on it and make sure that this is the right type of savings for your child. Another thing is, too, like I was kind of excited about this at first, is because, you know, we feel that it might be encourage people to work more. Because a lot of times our kids with disabilities, once they become adults and they can have a job, is what happens is, that, you know, as we're saying, they get penalized if they work too much, because then they lose their SSI benefits and all that. So this is maybe a way to encourage them that they can save a little bit more without losing their SSI, so they can work a few more hours here and there, and, you know, the low job won't be so bad. But one of the things that we need to make sure before you can say, oh, let's use this as a savings account, is because we don't really know how easy it's going to be to access. So that's something we need to keep an eye on for when all the regulations are in place, and make sure that at least if it's going to be used as like a savings account, it's easier to access than, you know, if you have to turn in your IRAs and things like that. So how do you establish an account? So the pending regulations will guide Massachusetts a little bit more on this, but the information, we don't know what information is going to be required to open the account yet, and we don't know what documentation will be needed. The regulations right now call for annual recertification, but again, you know, and we know that could be different by disability, but we really don't know if there's going to be other further details or qualified disability expenses that might be able to spend this money on. So again, this is information that's there. We don't know all the finer details, but again, it's something to look into as an option for your family. So again, the bottom line is that this is another option and a choice that people might be able to make to be able to help their child be able to be a little bit more independent. So again, the child will own the account. I'm just trying to think what else to say on this one. It's a good way to have that savings account for the student or child when they haven't had that option before because of all the limitations with SSI. But again, I can't stress enough, you really need to talk to a financial planner that you work with or look into before you make any final decisions if this is a good thing for you. Again, it's an option that's open now that wasn't there before. So I think it's time to take questions for this section now.
Some more great questions on this. First of all, can the money in an ABLE account be used for housing to buy a home or put a down payment on your condo for the individual?
No. So it can't be used to do that, but it can be used to make adaptations to make it handicap accessible and things like that, but you cannot use it to purchase a home as far as I know. Unless things change, the answer to that one is no.
And a clarification on the term payback. So that means when the child dies, the money goes back to Medicaid?
Yes.
Okay. And then can you crystallize what's the difference between an ABLE account and a regular savings account for your child?
Well, number one, it's not tax-free. So that's one, the biggest thing right now. If you just opened a savings account for your child, it wouldn't be tax-free, number one. So if they get too much money in there, then they're going to lose their SSI and maybe some other benefits as well. The ABLE account, unless they have over $100,000, then they're going to be able to keep their SSI benefits in that account. That's one of the biggest differences to me as a parent, but there's probably is others that I can't think of off the top of my head.
Great. That was all the questions we had on ABLE accounts. So if you guys have any more, keep them coming. And in the couple minutes that we have, just going to skip back to the first section where we have an overwhelming request for Joanne. Can you repeat the durable equipment vendors who sell?
Oh, sure. Let me see if I can find them. And again, this is something that once you get the speech and language evaluation, I have to find my page on that. Once you get the speech and language evaluation, they will provide you with the vendors that you should and could go to. And to my knowledge, right now there's 3. The vendors that you can get tablets from is Words Plus, Prentic Romic Company, and Tobii ATI, which is now merged with Dynavox. So it's Tobii ATI/Dynavox. Those are the 3 places you can go for tablets. So I'll repeat them one more time. Words Plus, Prentic Romic Company is the second one, and the third one is Tobii ATI/Dynavox, which have merged. So those are the places for to be able to get the tablets. And then to get the accessories, the 3 names are National Seating and Mobility, Hudson Mobility, and Numotion Mobility.
And then another question which had to do with the MassHealth covered services. If services are approved or authorized for 6 months, but then incorporated onto an IEP, will there need to be a reconvene meeting?
Repeat that?
So if services are approved for a child for 6 months.
For MassHealth services?
Yes.
Okay.
But then they're put into a child's IEP for the year. Will there need to be a reconvene meeting?
No, because the services that they're getting through MassHealth really has nothing to do with the services getting in the IEP. They're 2 separate processes, and one shouldn't have to do with the other than the fact that the school can now charge MassHealth for the ABA services. Does that make sense? I'm not used to not having people here to get answers to my questions as I'm getting the feedback as well, but I hope that made sense because they're 2 separate entities. They really should not have anything to do with one another, other than the fact that schools can, bill MassHealth now for the services being provided. Other than that, it should have nothing to do with how many hours are in your IEP and how many hours you're getting through MassHealth. They should not matter either way.
And then one last question about ABLEs before we move on. If the guidelines change for the ABLE and you are no longer eligible for the 529A, can you roll over your funds to a regular 529 account without any penalties?
Yes, I believe that is true. You can do that. But you know what? Now I'm double questioning myself because rolling over to a 529A to a 529. Oh God, I don't know. I need to get the answer to that. And if again, you can email me offline that question so I can make sure, because you can't roll over the 529 to the 529A, but can you do a 529A? I think you can, but I want to double check that. So whoever asked that question, do we have that question on there? And we can have this list. We'll keep this list later. Okay, so I can maybe even contact you with your emails with that question. So, okay, perfect. Okay, so I can get back to you on that. Sorry. See, I don't have the answers for everything, and it kind of feels like, oh no, she doesn't have the answer to anything. But we're trying to get the information out there as quickly as we can get it, so that parents know that at least these options are there now, whereas they weren't there before. So, and since it's all new processes, we don't know the answers to everything, and we won't know it until it's actually rolled out and things start to happen. So, sorry that I can't answer all the questions. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the autism endorsement, and there's really not a lot of slides on this and a lot of information, but the commission found that it was difficult for schools to educate the increasing number of children that are being diagnosed with autism. And in Massachusetts, the teaching licenses do not include requirements that have require skills needed to educate kids on the spectrum. So the solution was that an autism endorsement certification be put into place, and we feel that it's always the parent who every year goes up to the school and tells the teacher year after year after year what's best for their child. And we're hoping that with this endorsement, there'll be teachers. Well, right now it's only available for those in the special ed teachers, but we're hoping that then they pass the word down to the regular ed teachers as well. But, that we won't have to keep reinventing the wheel each year. That's what this is for. It's a if you build it, they will come type of process. And we hope that it will help that the teachers will take these courses and then bring it into the environment of the school so that it will help get our kids the services that they need. So one thing that we have to stress about this is that this is for teachers to take courses, and it's an option for them to take the courses. They don't have to. It's not a requirement. And that it's also not a requirement that the schools hire them. And it is similar to the transition endorsement that was out there a couple of years ago. So that right now the teachers I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. The regulations being proposed now will be just, as I said earlier, for the special ed teachers to get a license. And again, it's not for everybody, but we're hoping at some point, maybe down the line, that could be changed. It's something else that we really want to continue looking at to make sure that it is put into place, number one. And number two, that folks that the schools do start to hire the teachers that have this endorsement, because it's just going to help our kids. And this might be a place that you would have to go maybe through the IEP right now to make this happen for your child, is that, you can request through the IEP that your child have somebody who has the endorsement working with them. So that's one, it's another advocacy tool that might be able to be used and to help get these folks into place. And like I said, it's if you build it, they will come, because it's something that has never been offered before. We're hoping that now folks will start taking these courses to learn more about our kids. So we're thinking it's probably going to take a couple of years before there's any endorsement folks, autism endorsement folks in the local school districts. And again, it's not mandatory for teachers to take it, and it's not mandatory for schools to hire folks with this endorsement. But again, it's just another option for folks to learn more about kids with autism, and then to be able to help educate them better. So we are looking at the teacher competencies will be addressed down the line once it's being worked on now, actually. But it's going to include things like the verbal and nonverbal communication needs of our child. It's going to include social interactions and how our kids are socially with others, the sensory experiences and how kids on the spectrum encounter sensory problems. Behavior is another piece to it. And we're expecting that 4 courses will be part of the endorsement as well as a practicum. And so what happens is all teachers get an initial licensure, and then they go and they get their professional licensure. And this is something that would help with that. They're going to be able to get an autism endorsement as part of their licensure. So this is why I'm saying if you build it, they will come. But we really feel that the teachers are very hungry for this information, and that is something that is really, really needed. We're going to be able to make sure that this is strong. It's going to need a lot of advocacy still to make sure this happens. And I think that is that on this part of it. So we're going to open this to questions. Did we get questions on this one?
We did get questions.
Okay.
We've got a great audience here.
And I hope I'm making sense.
So the first one, would the autism endorsement certification be available to other disciplines besides teachers? For example, social workers, mental health therapists, SLPs, occupational therapists, or other clinicians?
Right. At this time, it's not. Right now, it's just for those that have the teachers for special education teachers. But that's something that we could look into later. But no, right now it's not. We're hoping we can open it up to regular ed teachers because a lot of our kids, and the thing is the least restricted environment is where we want our kids to be taught, and the least restricted environment is the typical classroom. So we really feel that it's really important that the regular ed teachers learn how to teach our kids as well. So that's why we're hoping at some point we could open it to regular ed teachers, but right now it's just for special education.
So would teachers with the autism endorsement certification be reimbursed at higher rates?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's possible, but I think like I said, it's just that, that the teachers go and they get their license and then they get their professional licensure. So I think this would be part of their professional licensure. So they would move up. I think teachers are paid by steps, most of them anyway. So like it's all these steps that they have to reach. And so I think it would be, they would get it and reach one of their steps, then yes, they would get higher pay. But I guess maybe not necessarily, depending on where they are in the process.
So how is this certification different than the registered behavior technicians through the BACB?
Well, because these folks that coming out of here, they're not going to be licensed behaviorists, and that they're just not. They're still, so it is different. I don't know, the difference between what a certified behavior, actually licensed BCBAs have to go through and teachers, but it's very different because these folks are teachers first, and then they're just getting this endorsement as part of their licensure. Whereas BCBAs, that's what they are, BCBAs. They could have been other things beforehand, but again, they can come from every different walks of life, whereas teachers, this is just for special ed teachers right now.
And so where would they be able to obtain the coursework for this?
Again, so it's got to be created first. So I think schools like, I don't know which schools, but such as possibly Lesley University, UMass Boston, any of the schools out there can create these programs. They have to then be approved by the department, and then the teachers then would be able to take the courses.
Sure. And then one question actually pertaining to what MassHealth covers, which is, I was told that MassHealth would not approve school programs as the MassHealth medical necessity criteria specifically states that an exemption is that the program is primarily academic or occurs in a school. Will MassHealth pay for school programs?
We were told that MassHealth schools will be able to charge MassHealth for the services being provided by ABA that the kids are getting in school. And again, I think it would be as it's medically necessary still, but the school is responsible to teach our children, and to help them. So is it medically necessary for our kids to understand about bullying? Maybe, yes, I think it is, because who wants to be beaten up, So there's different ways to look at it. So I think we were told that they would be covering it as long as it's written into the IEP. So maybe it wouldn't be for the full, say, 5 hours a day that your child gets. Maybe it's a smaller piece of it that they're being reimbursed. But, again, I don't know how it's going to play out yet, and that's something that, we'll learn as it happens.
Thanks for the great questions, everyone. Keep them coming as we proceed.
Okay. So now we're going to be talking about the DMH and DDS options that's new to the law. And the Commission found that there was a problem that individuals diagnosed with both autism and mental health illness were denied the eligibility for adult services from both DMH and DDS. And so the solution to this was that now that they would require DMH and DDS to develop a plan to ensure that individuals with both mental health illness and developmental disabilities get the services that they need from both agencies. So as you know, comorbidity is huge for kids on the autism spectrum, and but for those that were diagnosed with the ASD and mental health issues, they were being told by DMH that, oh, sorry, you have autism, you have to go to DDS, and then DDS was saying, sorry, you have a mental health issue, you go to DMH. And then they were getting no services and falling through the cracks. And with this new law, they're going to be able to hopefully get services from both agencies. So we're really very concerned. And again, so this is for adults right now. And so we're very concerned that we're not reaching all the adults that we really need to be able to get this information. So if you hear of adults, please encourage them to, to apply for DMH and DDS services if you know of the adults that might fall into this category. And we had to figure out how it's going to work out exactly for these families, but we're hoping it's going to be much better than it was for them beforehand or up till now. So they have to come up with this plan that may include an interagency agreement, which will streamline communications between the two departments, and they would have guidelines that will help determine which services would be provided by which department, and it would ensure that the adults would be getting services from both departments. And this plan isn't due till the end of December 2015. So we really feel that there's a chance for a lot of advocacy with this. We feel that once this plan is out, then they're going to have to look at it and make sure that it's up to par. So there may be a lot of advocacy needed to make this really work well. So this is open for questions now because that's all we have on this section. It was a short little section, but because we don't know everything yet, and we need to wait until after December, and then we'll probably be changing these slides. So if there's no questions.
No questions on this, Joanne.
Something
just came in. All right. My son is 23, and he has now been approved eligible for DDS for what? Still on. Oh, thank you. We just got a thank you note from someone. And then we had a clarification about the RBT question that was asked about in the last section, where someone is wondering, how does a school differentiate between whether or not the RBT certification is needed or the autism endorsement, where the RBT certification is a 40-hour training?
I guess I don't understand that question because, say it again, RBT. I can't even see it from here, sorry. You know what, I can't read the question from here. And I don't know the answer to that. So I can maybe see if we can find it.
We'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah, because that one, is there a way to, sorry about that.
Great. So proceeding on to the next section,
okay.
And keep these questions coming. They're wonderful.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the change adult eligibility criteria for DDS. So the Commission found that many adults with autism were ineligible for DDS because they didn't have an intellectual disability. So as you know, DDS was saying, no, your IQ is above 70, you're not eligible for services, so long, farewell. So now the solution to this, where adults with autism are now eligible for GDS based on having a developmental disability with substantial functional limitations. So it isn't just due to the IQ, which is actually a really good thing. And so hopefully this is something that's going to be exciting to a lot of you to find out about. So as you know, DDS was saying that kids weren't eligible if their IQ was above 70. So now they'll be eligible if they have a physical or mental impairment resulting from autism spectrum disorder, Prader-Willi syndrome, or Smith-Magenis syndrome that was onset before the age of 22. And so it also has to result in substantial functional limitations in 3 of the following major life areas: self-care, receptive and expressive language, learning, mobility, the capacity for independent living, and for economic self-sufficiency, and that it's likely to continue indefinitely. So this is actually opening up a lot of doors for a lot of our youth with autism. So, excuse me, what is the eligibility process? So the family or the youth is going to have to submit an application and all required documentation. So it's a long, actually a very long application, and it's on the DDS's website. It's also actually on MAC's website. And then the regional eligibility team will schedule an in-person meeting with the adult, and then once that has happened, then DDS will notify in writing within 60 days what their findings were, if they're eligible or not. Excuse me. But one thing I cannot stress enough is that adult services, just like every adult services, this is not an entitlement. This is only if DDS has the funds to be able to help pay for the services for the student. So that's one thing that you have to keep in mind, because as with all adult services, it's not an entitlement. Unlike the special ed services you get while you're in school, so get as many as you can while you're in school, and because once they leave, it's not an entitlement. So we've had a lot of different questions, and one of the things that we've checked with DDS about is that what is a reasonable amount of time for an evaluation, because that's what they're saying, that you have to have an evaluation that's been done within a reasonable amount of time. So again, my reasonable and your reasonable are a couple of different things, so it's hard to say, but we've talked to Janet George, and she's come up with a couple of examples I'd like to share with you. So she says that if you have a young adult that has a new diagnosis, and they were diagnosed for the very first time at 19, that evaluation has to be a recent evaluation. If you have a young adult who's 24 years old, and then a young adult now was diagnosed at 2 years old and then had no further evaluations after that, they would, of course, need something updated. So if you have a young adult and who was diagnosed at 2 years old, but every 3 years through the school system they kept being reevaluated, then they wouldn't need a new evaluation. So again, it's pretty broad, and Janet George is saying that they're taking it's a little bit more individualized. But if you have somebody who's maybe like 30 years old or older and was diagnosed under the DSM-3, they would absolutely need to have a new evaluation under the DSM-5. So those are some of the examples that we received that I wanted to share with you, so that you know that during this application process, what type of updated evaluations you need. So now we're going to be talking about you have to use the adult eligibility determination, ages 22 and plus, application, which is on MAC's website as well as DDS. And then you have to send in the supporting documentation. So it talks about the evaluations and showing that the adult has autism, completed by a qualified physician or psychologist, documentation that show that the autism was in place or was there before 22 years of age, and any other types of reports that you might have from other types of docs as well. And although IQ does not play the defining role in this anymore, they still may want an IQ test, so it's probably important to share that with them when you're filling out the application. So what happens next? So DDS, once you fill out the application and send it in, they take their time, and within 60 days they need to find out whether you're eligible, and if you are eligible, the area office assigned for service planning, and they'll provide, they'll assign you the office, and then they will have to then, what they've told me, that I found this out afterwards, is that they find you eligible, they assign you an office, and then those folks see you again, they come in and they do this new other evaluation. And so to determine what services they will be writing up in the ISP, which is the individual support plan. And but I was also told by folks at DDS is that they don't write a plan unless they're providing services, and that's something that is not the way we were told, so we're keeping an eye on that as well, because it is our understanding and our belief that, you know, you found eligible, they can do another assessment to find out what services that they're going to give you, that's okay, but then they should be writing up the individual support plan for the student, whether or not they're giving them services. So then DDS might find that the youth is ineligible, but what happens is that then provides an appeal right. And again, I would highly recommend that if you have somebody that's been found ineligible, you reapply, because a lot of times they do deny the first time, you know, and then should reapply and appeal it. Or they might find that the youth is, they might defer a finding of whether or not they're eligible because they want more information. So, but they would let you know what other information they want. And one thing, you know, they still right now, if you have an adult that falls into this area, then you should apply right away, because there's still some money available for this calendar year, and there's no wait list right now. So I would definitely apply if you have somebody that falls into this category. Okay, so the regulations that were written have 3 types of community living supports for families that they might receive. So, and they include services and supports that provide skill and training and supervision for the adults, such as respite, individual home supports, and adult companionship. Another type is services that provide meaningful day opportunities for the student. And again, just what that says, transportation to community-based and day supports, individualized and group supports for employment, things like that. And then the other type of service could be additional supports, and that could include behavior supports, any type of, excuse me, home modifications, therapies, and things like that. And again, in this case for DDS services, I can't stress enough that this is not an entitlement, that you have to, DDS does need to have the money to be able to provide these services for folks. So they might be, you might have somebody that's found eligible for all these services, but DDS might say, sorry, I don't have the money, you're not getting them. But that's where, you know, right now, I'm not saying that's happening right now. There is money available still for this calendar year for these folks that are going to hopefully be found eligible. But so have your folks that you know of apply for this. There are some service limitations for kids on autism, with autism, and currently one of the limitations is that there's no group home or 24/7 support options for the kids on the autism spectrum. So although DDS does support housing for those that have an intellectual disability, and it's autism supported pathways, for our kids at the higher functioning that don't have the intellectual disability, they're not allowing 24/7 housing options. But that doesn't mean, we feel that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to fight for it and to make a case that your person needs it, because as we know, a lot of our kids, although their IQ could be off the charts, their functional living skills are not where they need to be, and they could never, ever live independently without support. So that's something we need to, show DDS that can happen with our kids. So you should absolutely make a case for 24/7 living, even though they're saying it's not an option. So currently, the eligibility for DDS adult services is at 18. But DDS has proposed in their regulations, and they are going to be changing it to age 22. So the question is, what happens to those kids that are leaving school, before 22, those kids that are 18? And the answer was that they'll be eligible for DDS children's services and not for adult services from 18, if they're leaving school at 18 until 22. And that's actually a very big concern, because we have, services for kids that are 18. They shouldn't be getting child services. They should be getting adult services, such as, having somebody go with them to a job and teaching them those type of skills. Those kid services aren't where they should be. And DDS knows that, and they're actually, training folks right now to try to figure out what some of these services would be. So again, they're working on it. They're figuring it out. They've also hired 8 autism service coordinators in 23 area offices for the adult population, and they are in the process, or they probably have completed by now, actually, training them. And the regulations are still on hold, but DDS is moving ahead on this, because as of right now, or as of just a few weeks ago when we were checking with them, they're providing services to 318 people due to the changes in these regulations. So that's 318 more people that are getting services that weren't before this new law. So that's really kind of very exciting for those kids. So again, we're really not 100% sure what type of services these kids from 18 to 22 will be getting, but we have to work with them, and hopefully they'll see that these kids need to get adult services, not child services. Okay, here we are. So before the laws changed, DDS was turning down some folks because they weren't eligible because of their IQ. So if an individual applied and was denied before the law was passed in August 2014, please encourage these families, if they haven't already, to reapply. And because there's still a chance they're going to get services. As I said, there was 318 folks already who are getting the service because of this, and hopefully we can get some more as well. And GDS was saying that if they had recently applied, that they don't have to resubmit all their documents, but we would recommend that if they're going to be reapplying, I would resubmit everything that they have and just start over from scratch, because it's not going to hurt that they have more of the information twice than maybe having things misplaced that they didn't have in front of them anymore. So rather be safe than sorry. So with that, we're going to open it up to questions again.
First question here. Joanne, could you talk more about what the calendar year by year means? For example, if they provide services for something new, can they take away that funding the next year when I apply again?
Right. And so, yes. So it's possible that you could be eligible and get services one year, but if they didn't have funding, I guess it's possible that you may not get services the next year. Although I don't honestly, well, I can't even say that. from some of the helpline calls that I know we've received here, I haven't heard that they take services away. Usually once you're getting services, you stay, you get services. They may change some, but I don't know if they've ever completely taken services away from folks saying you're no longer eligible. That would be a little bit cruel, but I don't know if that's happened. So I'm not sure to the answer to that, I guess. But I guess it could if they run out of money.
Do you see the budget for the Omnibus eventually being used for supported housing?
Yeah, but like right now for these kids, they're not doing the 24/7 supportive housing. So again, I can't say that yes, it will, but that's one reason that, and actually I think it's the next few slides that we talk about the Autism Commission, is this law has made the Autism Commission a permanent entity, and I think that's really an important piece to this because this is going to be somebody who's going to be overseeing all this and maybe helping change the laws a little bit more for that to happen. So right now they don't have the 24/7 option for kids with the higher IQs, but that maybe could change down the line. We'll see. With a lot of advocacy, it could. You never know.
And this question pertains to some earlier material we covered. It says, my son has both DMH and Omnibus services. No one seems to know what services are available or how to get them. Some quick and easy tips, Joanne?
When you're saying DM, I guess I don't know what you mean by DMH and Omnibus services.
I'm guessing this person means Autism Omnibus Bill. But, yeah, if you can spell out acronyms from time to time.
No, I do know it. Right, no, but I think so. She's getting DMH services. Does she want to get DDS services? So she should, that's something that she should then apply for, is reapply for DDS and see if she is found eligible now. Or reapply to see if she's found eligible, maybe not reapply if she never did. But if you're only getting services covered under DMH and your child has autism, they may be eligible for services from both. But we don't know what those services are going to be because nothing is really ready for that until probably after December.
So it's an issue of timing.
It's an issue of timing, right, unfortunately. But if your child has a high IQ, depending on how old they are, if they're an adult, they could apply for the DMH services in the meantime as well. They could be found eligible now.
Terrific. Thank you, Joanne.
Is that on the questions there? Or is there more?
That's all that's come in.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to be moving right along. We might finish a little bit early. I don't know. We'll see. So the next slide actually talks about the Autism Commission, and I've already talked a little bit about this, but the Commission found that the Autism Commission's recommendations needed to be implemented, and one of the ways to do that was to make the Autism Commission a permanent group that would be responsible for overseeing not only this law but others that might come down the line. So there's still so much to do and there's so much unknown, not only just about this law, but for other things as well. So it's really important that this commission, I think it's a great thing that the commission is going to be a permanent entity. And so the commission will have 34 members, and some will be the same as the original commission. Others won't reapply, but others will and have. I believe Julia Landau from MAC and Amy Weinstock and Barbara L'Italian are all going to be the same as others, I'm sure will too. And there'll still be DDS and DMH and all the adult agencies included in this. And then, one of the things that, so the Autism Commission will monitor services and supports for individuals with autism, including, what's going on in public education, what's happening in higher education. So they'll see where our kids are and all this employment, independent living. So all this is, housing. They're going to look at housing even more. So they're definitely looking into all these options. And with the Autism Commission there, it's just more likely to be taken seriously and be able to make changes maybe down the line. We expect that the commission will have a lot of working groups, so there's still ways to be involved if you're interested. And we know that there will be an executive director. As a matter of fact, the application was just put out for that position, which is good news because that means the governor has stopped his freeze, I think. So I think that's what it means. And we're thinking that the executive director might have some staff. So, and then they are meant to be an independent entity under or within EOHHS, which is the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. And they do need to report to the legislation yearly, I believe, as the Autism Commission. So that's all there is on this part as well. Is there any questions on the commission?
We do have a question.
Okay.
Joanne, how would one become part of the Autism Commission?
That's actually a really good question. And I'm not sure if I know the answer to that, but I don't know if all the commission members are filled. That's something I would have to find out about. But like I said, they just actually released the job position for the commission person. And so I'm sure this is other things that we would find out later down the line. But I can try to find out. And again, we, I think, have emails with your questions, I believe. And so I'll be able to reach out to you if I find the answer to that for sure, if it's different than what I've said. I know the members put in their, I guess you'd say, applications months ago when the law was first passed, and I don't know if every member has been filled. So that's something I need to double check on.
And a question pertaining to the section you last covered. When someone is found eligible for adult services, is the primary disability on the IEP what determines the services, or would a neuropsych and other documentation be helpful?
Yeah, no, because now we're talking about, with the DDS services, we're talking about adult services. So once you leave the special education world, an IEP really isn't helpful, although it might be a part of a document that would be added to the other assessments to determine eligibility. It's not going to determine services for adult services. Does that make sense? Okay.
That's all the questions we have for this section.
Okay, well, and actually, so that is well, all right, wait a minute now. Come back to my other page. Sorry. I think the rest of the slides, actually, the next slide is just a summary of what we discussed. So there's really nothing to add to that. So that's it for that. And then the next few slides are just for information. You can go to our websites on there. And then the other slides are other resources that you can get information from, so there's like 3 additional information slides. So we do have a little bit of time that we could ask, go back to or answer some of the other questions again. I don't think we'll take a whole half hour to answer questions, but we could. It's however we want to go, see how it goes. So does anybody have questions for any part of this that I can try to answer? Or should we back up and ask questions that we didn't get to before?
I'm quickly going through our backlog. I think there's one that I've flagged.
Okay.
Will MassHealth accept an evaluation and recommendation from a school district SLP?
That's a good question. I don't know, because sometimes you have to be careful, because sometimes when you have a speech and language pathologist, I would assume she's a speech and language pathologist, as long as it's not a speech and language pathologist assistant. So I would assume if you have a recommendation from the school speech and language pathologist in writing that says that they need the device for Yeah, I would say absolutely, because there's no difference between the speech and language pathologist working inside or outside the school, as long as it's not a speech and language pathologist assistant working in the school.
Another question. When leaving high school, does a 688 referral determine adult services?
So the 688 referral doesn't necessarily determine services. The 688 referral lets the adult agency know that you're coming, because it will depend on the disability and whichever agency they make the 688 referral to. And the referral is just that. Then, you have to then get determined whether or not you're accepted into that adult agency and what services that would be provided. So it's not the 688 referral that gives that services. It's what comes after that. They still have to write up the plan and all that stuff. The referral is just the referral.
And can your child receive SSI or SSDI before they're 18?
Yes. That's all I know about it. I just know yes.
We're getting a question about how a PDF of this seminar can be obtained. A PDF was sent out with a reminder email, but we can send one out again and make it available on our website. We'll give it a couple more minutes for questions while we still have Joanne with us.
One thing I may have forgotten is, and I don't remember if I did this in the introduction, did I mention that when you're signing off, there will be a pop-up of an evaluation? Yeah, I talked about that. So this is just a reminder to fill out that evaluation so we have that information and we can make changes to the presentation if needed, and how to improve. And since this is our first webinar, it can help us hopefully do a better job. So please be sure to fill that out. That was more questions.
We're not getting any more questions, so we are going to call it a night. Oh, hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
Question coming in.
Somebody's typing a question, so we'll hold on to get the question. Did we get a question?
When did you say that more information would be available on these topics, specifically ABLE?
So ABLE, we won't have any more information until probably January that our slides would be changing, because the ABLE information is due in December. No, am I making that up? No, but not until January, I think we talked about, of 2016, I believe. Oh, where is it? Sorry, yeah. So we are expecting that to be January 2016, I believe. So by then we would have more information and the changes and all that stuff. So yes.
We're getting an audience comment that there's no due date for ABLE, but expected in January. Next, how can we stay up to date on these items that you mentioned that will need to be monitored? Are they on MAC's website?
Yeah, so we do have this information on MAC's website, and we try to update it as often as we get updates, and we're hoping that that will be a good way to get this information without having to do a presentation all over again. But yes, but the minute we get, like, the regulations come out and they're finalized, it's going to go up on our website. The minute we get this, well, I can't say the minute we get, but as soon as we get, and we're able to, we put that up on our website. And I guess, too, It's probably a good idea to maybe have our presentation up there, and each time but we keep changing it so often, so it's kind of hard to keep up with that. But yes, I'm sorry, it is on our website. There's an Omnibus page, and that link is in the back of the slide.
Will you do more webinars?
Probably. And maybe, I mean, what do you guys think? I mean, do you think we should do this again in a few months, for updates and stuff like that? Oh, thanks. Okay.
And
okay, so I'm getting answers. Yes, absolutely. So maybe that's something that we could then do, is plan to do something like this again in a few more months, probably after the new year, and maybe there'll be more updates then. So.
And yeah, absolutely. Like if you do want another webinar, please fill out that form at the end of this webinar. Like all of this feedback will go into our planning, and please feel free to email us as well. Another question: are there any programs currently available for autism endorsement certification?
Not to my knowledge, not yet. I could be wrong, but as far as I know, not yet. I'm thinking one of the ones that will happen sooner rather than later is Leslie University, but again, I could be wrong. UMass Boston might be another one that would happen sooner rather than later.
We're getting more questions about how to stay in touch with us. You can follow us on our Twitter @MassAdvocates. We also have a Facebook page, and we do have an email newsletter. You can sign up on our webpage, or at the very end of this webinar, when you close out of it, there will be a survey asking you if you want to join. Please select yes, because otherwise you won't be automatically enrolled. We're giving it a couple more minutes to see if any other questions roll in. And thank you guys so much for being such a great audience. It's been a real pleasure talking to all of you tonight.
And thank you for listening. And so I guess since no more questions are coming in, we can just call it a night.
Great. If you have further questions that you needed answers to, if you had any more questions about how to contact us, you can visit us at our website, www.massadvocates.org. You can email me at sgupta@massadvocates.org, sgupta@massadvocates.org, or follow us on Twitter or on Facebook. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.